Well, hi there. Welcome to the show. It's Tuesday and it's time for my weekly sit down with Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos. Eric, as always, a lot going on. How are you today?
Oh, I'm good. And there is a lot going on. It looks like the president has descended upon Washington, D.C. to give
The
instructions to his
president.
viceroy.
I hope people will go to your website and see your article about the president, president of the Lone Star State. No, the one with 6 points on it.
I mean, it may be, it may come across as a little bit rough, but I think it's roughly accurate, isn't it? We're in this awful war, and we're in the war because of this guy, who goaded Trump into doing it, using I don't know what leverage he's got over Trump, but he obviously has leverage. Trump even openly admitted that he took us to war for the sake of Israel. That's just it's not even a contentious point at this point because it's a stated fact. So now the worrying thing is they've paused the war a little bit. The bombing has stopped again as of I guess Friday, and now Netanyahu is in town, and obviously he's in town because they're kibitzing about what to do next. Well, what do you think they're going to do next? I see that there's probably three options. One of them is not likely. That option is that they're going to admit defeat, if not overtly, and try to sort of shove this all under the carpet and go back to the status quo ante. They're not going to do that. So that leaves us with two other options. The first option, I think, is that they're contemplating the insanity of committing ground troops to this thing and attempting some kind of ground invasion of Iran, which is literally, I don't even have the words to articulate how crazy that is. And it's not just me. I'm not a military guy. Colonel Douglas Macgregor is. And if you're interested in someone who actually has some standing to talk about that hypothetical possibility, I recommend watching his videos. Anyhow, then there's the third option, which is the worst option of all, which is that they're actually going to use nuclear weapons against the Iranians. And I think that that's possible. Macgregor does too, because the way this is being framed, this idea that Iran cannot be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon, whether they do or don't is beside the point. They're framing it as an existential threat. Well, an existential threat would justify the first use of nuclear weapons, wouldn't it? I'm
Oh,
terrified that that's where this is headed ultimately.
and there was some other trickery that I think Representative Thomas Massey pointed out last week, and that was they're treating the 12 days in June where we bombed Iran as a separate war from what's going on right now. And presumably there was some kind of a 90 days that the president has, to deploy troops or to use military assets in this way before he has to get congressional permission or some authorization of force. But by declaring it a second war, oh, gee, look, we have our coverage to be able to do that. That sounds so dishonest on every level.
It's insolent. It's of a piece with this idea that we're supposed to believe based on the latest photograph that they've revealed of the dirty turtle and his wife sitting and looking just perky in that hospital room. And it looks to me like it's actually a version of the same picture they released a couple of weeks ago. We're supposed to believe that this man is competent, that he's capable of fulfilling the duties of his office, when it's evident that they're just trying to play out the clock through August the 5th and to avoid having to put somebody in there or have an election. It's outrageous. They don't even adopt the pretense any longer of respectful lies. It's like these brazen, outrageous, effronterous lies now are just the characteristic of late stage terminal cancer America.
Hey, speaking of lies, love to get your take on Dr. Fauci's diaries. There was some pretty heavy hitting information that came out in the last couple of days. And look, I haven't handled the diaries. I can't, confirm those are exactly his words. If they are his words, wow. Someone, I'm looking toward the press corps, owes the American people, and for that matter, the world, a massive apology and probably should, I don't know. The Japanese had a way of handling this with a short, sharp sword, but for the sake of their honor, they should probably maybe remove themselves from their positions of power or influence and not seek power there again.
But this is nothing new or nothing unexpected. We all know Fauci's a criminal and an awful human being. This is not a revelation. And I hope I'm wrong, but I foresee that absolutely nothing consequential will happen. It'll be the usual dog and pony show. Maybe they'll get Fauci to make a few admissions before Congress, but they're not going to do anything to him. He's not going to be indicted. He's not going to be prosecuted. He's not going to be sent to prison for the rest of his miserable life, which probably isn't very long. He's 85 years old. Nothing will happen to him. Nothing ever happens to these people, ever. And I think the American people are up to here with it.
Yeah.
It's just inexcusable. You and I talked about this so many times. If when I drive down to the gym after we get off the radio here, I happen to go by a cop who's lurking in a bush and he catches me for going 66 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone, I will have to pay an exorbitant fine. My insurance will go up, yada, 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 even though I've harmed absolutely nobody, but I affronted some statute. Whereas this creep, this cretin, this horrendous individual who destroyed how many countless people's lives, literally in the sense that people did die, people have been catastrophically injured. I have a good friend whose business was ruined as a result of COVID. He lost his little restaurant because of this. It's really personal to me. And nothing is going to happen to these people, not a thing.
And this is probably me refusing to let go of a past wrong here, but I'm looking at the press. I'm looking at the news media and the Reporter Guild that did not do its due diligence, that did not do its duty to really seek out the truth. They were lapdogs and they lied, and they need to be called on it. And I would, if someone could say, look, I was wrong, I was dead wrong, I can be very forgiving. But for them to pretend that, well, there's nothing to this, there's nothing at all, I kind of understand, because they would be admitting they were monsters in how they behaved.
Well, they're
But at the same
tools.
time,
They're
yeah.
tools. They're script readers. And the only power that we really have that's effective is to just not watch them, not listen to them, not buy their magazines, not pay for subscriptions to their services, cast them out. That can be actually very effective if enough of us do it. Marginalize them, make them into the laughing stock that they ought to be.
Yep. But above all, do not trust them. This is the message
That's
we've been
obviously a
sharing
gift.
for years,
Yeah.
but don't trust them. In fact, I'm going to include an article in today's show notes about how common definitions have kind of been sent to a political graveyard. This is an article from Paul Rosenberg, but think about how many things come up in the course of discussion that the meaning has been inverted. You know, I, I I was invited to a struggle session last week. I was campaigning at the county fair, and actually just was trying to be neighborly. I walked over to the Democrat booth, which was across from us, and said hi to an individual who it turns out was a trans individual, who immediately thought, "Oh, well, here it is, a chance for a struggle session." And I declined the invitation, but it's all built on these false definitions of we can no longer tell what a man is, what a woman is. It's
False
whatever
and
a person
oily.
feels.
False and oily. With regard to that particular topic, gender is a grammatical term. If you look at other languages that, German, French, Italian, and so on, the way they construct a sentence has to do with the gender of a pronoun, in that context, not the
Yep.
biological context. Sex is not fungible. Like it or not, sorry, you're born one way or the other, unless you're hermaphrodite, and that's a birth defect. You have male or female chromosomes, period. How you feel about it is irrelevant. And I have nothing against people who have issues with their identity. That's fine. But I refuse to be pressured and coerced into pretending that something that is false is true. You're not a woman because you dress like one. Sorry. And maybe that hurts your feelings, and I'm sorry. Maybe some people are hurt by saying 2 + 2 = 4 rather than 5. I believe that reality is important and that we need to defend objective reality. And we can't even have intelligent conversations anymore. Shifting gears a little bit to talk about another example of it, we were stuck in the situation of having to argue about what they called vaccines, but they weren't
Oh yeah.
vaccines. They changed the definition. It was once understood that a vaccine was something that conferred immunity, meaning you would not get whatever the illness was that you were being vaccinated for. Whereas what they did was they pushed this drug on people that they later admitted was at best a symptom suppressor. Didn't mean you weren't going to get it. It didn't mean you couldn't spread it. So they lied. And yet, how do you have a conversation when the common understanding of the word no longer means what it once meant and is understood by everybody in the conversation to have a very specific meaning?
Here, here. And this is, this is just a warning to anybody who really wants to remain rooted in reality. So much of politics today is designed to separate you from reality, and to me the greatest disconnect I felt was I didn't go over to start a political discussion or a debate. I just went over to say hi. I was trying to be neighborly,
Sure.
but there is a sadly there's a large subsection of people for whom every human encounter must first be defined in terms of political dynamics and who is the greatest victim and therefore holds the greatest power in a conversation. What a sick way of living.
Sick and humorless and dreary. I mean, I'm a libertarian, and so I'm all for like the great panoply of human expression and differences and all of those sorts of things. I don't have a problem with somebody wearing whatever outfit they want to wear, and I absolutely don't have a problem with a dude who wants to dress up in a dress. I'm not like hostile toward that guy. Go ahead, live your life, dude. And if I meet him and he's a nice guy, we can be friends. Just don't tell me I have to actually believe that you're a woman. You stop doing that and we can be friends. But if you do that, we can't be friends.
You had a great article on cultural vandalism and using Christopher Nolan's film The Odyssey as a good example of this inversion of reality for what purpose, right? We have a tranny is a Greek warrior, a black woman is Helen of Troy, and these things are not offensive in and of themselves, but you have to ask the question why.
Well, I think
Why
they are
was that
offensive in
necessary?
themselves because it's a defacement. And I think it is obvious when you turn it around. Imagine they remade Roots. Remember Roots with that,
Oh yeah, yeah.
LeVar Burton from Star Trek? Well, let's remake Roots and cast Ryan Gosling as Kunta Kinte. How do you suppose that'd go over?
No,
How
it's a
about
good
Sydney
point.
Sweeney as Harriet Tubman? This
Yeah.
is counterfactual. It's ahistorical. It is exactly the piece with this agenda of forcing people to pretend that a biological man is in fact a biological woman because he affects the mannerisms and wears the clothing of a woman. Sorry, Helen of Troy wasn't a black woman. I've got nothing against black people, but Helen of Troy was a Greek. Greeks are not black people. Putting a black actress in that role is an affront. It's purposeful. It's meant to annoy us, just as it would be annoying if somebody were to make a film about Dr. King and Ryan Gosling were cast in the role of Dr. King. Everybody would understand it's gratuitous and it's insulting, and that's why it ought not to be done.
Well, and I'm exercising my veto of don't have any intention of seeing it. As with many things that Hollywood puts out there, they just don't have anything to offer me at this point. I have a lot of great books. Love to spend time with them, and frankly, for anybody who's wringing their hands over, well, but Hollywood isn't doing what it used to. That's okay. There are alternatives, and the nice thing
Speaking of
about those
that,
books is they don't evolve. What's written in them stays written in them and doesn't change because the political winds shifted this direction or that direction.
it does change though when they make film adaptations and TV adaptations. I don't know whether
True.
whether you've been watching or The Last Kingdom. It's a series that I've liked to watch, and it's based on a book. And the book is all about pre-conquest, that is before 1066 England, where you had the Saxons and the Danes attempting to decide who was ultimately going to control what became England. So we're talking about 10th, ninth century England. And at first the TV adaptation of that followed the book, but then they had to smuggle in guess who? Guess who's coming to dinner, to borrow a line. Out of the blue, all of a sudden, in the ninth century, you find a black priest and black lords sitting at the table of an earldoman, a king in England at that time, which is preposterous. And to raise this question, you risk, oh, you'd be racist for noticing it. No, they're just, I'm sorry, there weren't any black lords sitting at the table in England 1,000 years ago. There just weren't, period. And to attempt to do this is to attempt to greasily alter the past, just like Orwell wrote about, to change what is factual. It's not racist, it's not anti-black. It's an obnoxious, effronterous attempt to rewrite the past, and that's dangerous, and we should all oppose that.
By the way, I did see an episode or two of the new Little House on the Prairie series. My wife started watching that, and in some ways, it's not bad. It seems very true to the book, but maybe 10 minutes in, we get our first, peak of wokeness and it just there's a lot of girl boss energy. There's a lot of, oh, look, the Indians are so civilized and the Native Americans, they are so much above these settlers with their guns and their, conquest attitude and yes, and there's a black doctor, that was there to take care of the town. It's again, it's rewritten through a lens of Hollywood trying to show us how it could have been.
Yeah,
But the fact
that's
is, it
fine if they
wasn't.
presented it honestly in that way, but they don't. They're taking historical narratives and they are altering them to suit current political orthodoxies. And really, again, the only way to combat that is to just not have anything to do with it. Don't watch it. Don't pay to watch it, certainly. Make it plain that you find this repellent. I would find it repellent if they remade Roots and did cast Ryan Gosling as Kunta Kinte. I wouldn't watch that either because it's just as obnoxious and affronterous. That was a story about African slaves and their experience being brought here and all of that. And it's a fine story and it should be kept authentic, not altered to suit political correctness.
Here, here. Let's talk things automotive for a few moments. Actually, I liked your article on old new cars are selling, and that headline's going to need a little bit of explanation.
Yeah, really interesting. It turns out the Dodge Durango, which hasn't been changed since 2011, so it's 15 years old, even though they're selling them now. It's a brand new car, but effectively it's an old car. It's a 15-year-old car. They've done very little to change it since then. Selling gangbusters. It is, in fact, it has had the best 6 months since the vehicle was last updated back in 2011. They've sold about 40,000 of them so far. Now, to put that in some context, Dodge has only sold about 4,500 of the new Charger, which is finally available with an engine. So effectively, this ancient Durango is keeping Dodge alive. It's the only Dodge that's actually selling in any volume and making any money. I wonder why. Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, since it is a 2011 model, it hasn't got a lot of this creepy, cloying, invasive technology that they have put into the newer vehicles. It doesn't even have any safety assistance technology. Some of it's optional. You can get it if you want to, but it's, I think, just about the only brand new vehicle you can get that doesn't have lane keep assist technology, brake assist technology. And in addition to that, it doesn't have that creepy, drowsy, distracted driver eye movement monitor that is now popping up in almost all of the new cars. The second thing is it still comes standard with a V6. Can you imagine that? Not a turbo hybrid augmented little four-cylinder engine. And finally, it's affordable. You can pick one up for about $37,000. Can you imagine that? That's $20,000 less than the base price of the new Charger. The new Charger with the engine, it's a beautiful car. I like it a lot. It's $51,000. I mean, the last time you could get a Charger, before the current restyle in 2023, you could have bought a brand new Charger for $32,000. So the price over 3 years has gone up by $20,000.
Wow.
So you could get
Now,
a V8 Durango with a 392. This is two steps up the food chain, the high performance Hemi V8, and still pay less for it than the base Charger. And then you'd have a Durango that seats seven because it's an SUV with 3 rows, as opposed to,
Durango
yeah,
to
a sedan with two, with just space for five.
we had the chance to take a Durango to New Mexico and back. My wife and I rented one, and I've never been a big fan of Mopar. I've never been a big fan of Dodge, but that was a pretty decent ride. Plenty of
Yeah.
power and surprisingly good gas mileage.
Yeah, interestingly, if you look at the stats, you hear all about, oh, the turbo hybrid augmented four-cylinder engines, they get such good gas. No, they don't. Look at the difference. Look at the actual numbers. The V6 Durango's city highway numbers are only about 2 to 3 miles per gallon below what you would get with one of these turbo hybrid augmented drivetrains, which are much more expensive to buy. So poof, there goes any savings, and much more complicated and failure prone because they have more failure points. You've got all these additional elements in the drivetrain. Whereas, a simple V6 that's strong enough to pull the thing without struggling, you change the oil and the thing probably will go 250,000 miles before it breaks. So, duh, you wonder why the thing is selling. It's kind of like, there's only one hamburger stand left in the country that actually stills hamburgers rather than veggie soy burgers. You suppose they're going to do a good business there?
Now, this is good to know because I know there are not very many vehicles out there today that that you expressed genuine excitement for or interest in. I mean, I saw your article. Is it Honda doing away with the stick shift?
Yep. Yeah. The Acura, well, the Honda Civic Si was the only Civic that you can still get with a manual. Amazing, because at one time the Civic was an economy car and it came standard with a stick. Now they all come with CVT automatics, except for the Si, and then its Acura cousin, the Integra A-Spec, which was available with the same drivetrain. Well, Honda's pulling them from the market once again because of regulatory compliance reasons. They don't know whether that drivetrain will pass muster with the pending 2027 iteration of whatever the requirements are, because they haven't been released yet. And so they're in this impossible position. They'd like to sell it. The problem is that if it's not certified by the federal government, they get in trouble. So rather than deal with it, they just pull it off the market and go with the automatics, because the thing about an automatic is you can program it. These are all electronically computer controlled things. They can be set up to shift at a certain point every single time. And that makes it much easier to program it to do well on these federal certification tests. Manuals are something that the individual driver controls. They're highly individualistic. You can't control when it shifts, and all these other factors. And that is a problem in terms of compliance. That's one of the reasons why manual transmissions have become as scarce as ashtrays in new cars.
Are there any other vehicles that you have tested recently that you want to give a shout out to? Of course, I want to send people to your website to read all the articles, but anything within recent memory that stands out?
Yeah, with some caveats. I recently had a chance to test drive the new Toyota Tacoma, which no longer has a V6. It used to be available with a V6. But it is the only vehicle in its class that you can still get with a manual transmission. And that's something. You can still get a Taco with a 6-speed manual. The caveat, the star is you can only get it in the high trim with 4-wheel drive. And at that point, you're pushing $45,000, which is just a tragedy. It used to be that the base trim SR came standard with a manual transmission. And so it was accessible and affordable for people like you and me who would just like, a simple, reliable, basic truck to knock around in. Aren't looking for a truck bro, jacked up, TRD, big gas shocks kind of a thing. Not that
Right.
there's anything wrong with that. That's fine. I just don't want to spend $45,000 on a pickup.
Here, here. Well, I encourage our listeners, go to ericpetersautos.com. You will find enough information there to keep you informed as well as entertained for many, many hours. Eric, thank you as always for joining me, and I look forward to our conversation next week.
Good, O'Brien. Thank you.